Welcome to everyone who's joining. We're just gonna give maybe another minute for people to log on to Zoom. You'll see a little tab on the top left-hand corner of your screen that says we're live on YouTube, which says what it says. We are live on YouTube, so something we want you to be aware of. Let's see, 39 participants. Josh, should we give it another minute, or maybe let's begin and we can catch people we can catch them up as they join. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, and maybe have a question we could throw out to ask people to find a little time.
Sure, let's do that. And I'll switch things up on my end a little bit. So whilst we're waiting for others to join in, we thought it might be a good idea to just get a little bit of participation going. Great, I see some of you putting your names in the chat and introducing yourselves. Please feel free to do that and continue using the chat function, which we'll keep an eye on. But if I can just share my screen and take you to a Slido poll whilst we wait for others to join. We want to get to know who you are and why you're here. Can I have a thumbs up from you, Joss, if you can see my screen?
Yeah, maybe a link. Do you have a link for us to go to directly in the chat?
Amazing. So if you just go to slido.com, there's a QR code there that you can use, or simply just type slido.com, which will, when you get to slido.com, you'll be asked to put in a code, key in 216480, and that should take you to a bunch of questions that we have for you whilst we wait for people to join our Zoom room. So let's go. Just want to get a sense of your familiarity with systems innovation. That's precisely the community that we are. I know some of you might be new, some of you might be veterans and coming back for joining us for lots of events now. So just amazing, that's great. So the majority of us have done work with systems innovation tools. A smaller number are either are very new to it, that's 18%, and then another group in the middle there who do work with systems and innovation. The order is wrong. I was expecting the second statement to come up at the top. Right, it's reordered it for me. Brilliant. So all of you here have some understanding, which is great. And others are still fairly new to it. That's exactly what today's webinar will be about. We'll be exploring exactly some of these systems tools in the context of the circular economy. On which note, I'm curious about which sectors you're working in. So if you think about the circular economy, which sectors are you working in? Brilliant. Donut economics. As a broader theme. I love Kate Rayworth's book. For those of you who are new to it, you might want to check that out. And we've also got quite a few sectors coming up. So agriculture looks like a really big one for our panelists to take note of, and several others. So urban context, well, agriculture as well, fashion, supply chain, food systems, exactly connected to agriculture there. Public sector, yep, so lots of different sectors that obviously will cut across each other. Fantastic. I'm just going to give another 10 seconds to sort of see where this goes. Quite a few of you working in the public sector and finance. don't have the capability right now to try and understand all the cross sections, but I can only imagine how complex our map here would be if we were indeed to launch into a systems map of the sectors you work in. Excellent. I'm going to move us on to our final question before we begin today's webinar properly. What would you like to get out of today's session? So just in 2 or 3 words, anything particular that you're looking for, and our panelists and myself as your host, we can try and kind of cater and kind of spend more time to really make sure you get what you want. So new ideas, practical insights. Anything new here? Well, hopefully we're going to be looking at the intersection of systems innovation and circular economy. So hopefully there would be something new here for you. Interesting discussion, amazing connectivity. Great. New idea seems to stand out there. Exactly, new methods and perspectives, practical insights. Excellent, right. We could go on and do this for the whole session, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now, and really thank you for your contribution. I think that's really useful for us, particularly for our panelists for today. So a huge welcome to those of you who have just joined our call, our webinar today. We are, if you missed it, just in case you're in the wrong room, we are here to explore systems innovation and how that can help us to develop a more circular economy. This is an event that's hosted by the Systems Innovation London Hub, which launched earlier this year. I hope some of you were there for our launch. We're essentially a community of people and organizations who are really curious about systems, and we come together to learn, connect, and collaborate. More about the hub and the systems innovation platform at the end of our call today for those of you who are new and want to get involved. But just a quick tour of who's in the room. Well, all of you, but on our end, there's myself, Jacqueline. I'm a systems strategist and a coach based in London. I'm interested in all things systems, sustainability, and social justice. I'll be your host, your facilitator for today. Also very pleased, Joss Colchester. Do you want to give a quick wave? Brilliant. Joss is the founder of the Systems Innovation Platform and also the instigator of the now, I lost track of the number, something like 20 hubs that have sprouted all over the globe exploring systems innovation. You'll be hearing from Joss in a little bit with this circular economies toolkit that he's been working on. We'll be sharing that shortly. And we also have 2 guests, Ruben and Dina. I'll be introducing them a little bit later in our session today. But essentially, we're going to be hearing from them some practical insights, exactly the things that you've all put down on the Slido poll a few moments ago. So how we're going to run today's session is we're going to be listening from Joss, from Ruben, and from Dina, about 15 minutes each of them. We'll then be moving on into a bit of a panel discussion, and it would be brilliant for all of you to stay engaged, put in any comments and questions into the chat. I'm sure they all have access to it, but I'll also do the job of trying to synthesize some of them and bring some of them into a panel discussion involving all of you on our webinar today. So, and for those of you who missed my note right at the start, this session is being recorded and is streamed live on YouTube as we speak. So just to make you aware that that is the case, we hope everyone's comfortable with that. Brilliant. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Joss, who's going to tell us about the circular economy toolkit that has just been launched on the Systems Innovation Platform. Joss, over to you.
Great, thank you very much for that, Jacqueline. Great to be here and see this happening. Very passionate about this subject of circular economies. It's incredible how much waste we produce in the world, and I think there's a much smarter, much better ways to do this. And I think this is about a lot to do with systems, building better systems for how we extract and use and produce and exchange natural resources. So that's what I'm going to talk on today. How to kind of shift from parts to systems to really help us build a circular economy. Let me share my screen here and jump into the presentation. Here we are. I'll full screen this, and off we'll go, hopefully. There we go. So systems innovation for circular economies, how does that fit together? How can it help us? How can it enable circular economies? As someone questioned there, is there something really here? Let's see about that. So what I'm presenting on today is taken, as Jacqueline said, from our toolkit for circular economies. This kind of brings together bit of our research and content around this, but also a lot of our tools. We've developed a whole toolkit for doing systems innovation, a lot of canvases and guides and so forth. And this one here kind of pulls those together specifically for people trying to do systems innovation in the context of circular economies, trying to really transform systems, as I'll be talking about here today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a little high-level overview to kind of the circular economy concept, the narrative, and then go into kind of why we need systems thinking here, kind of limitations of existing approaches, and then a bit into the toolkit and some of those canvases and so forth. So hopefully going to do that in 15 minutes to give space to the others. So a bit of context to get started. As mentioned, the circular economy idea, I believe, I think we're kind of witnessing the end of an era of a paradigm in how we do our materials economy, the industrial model, where most people on this call will be quite familiar with this kind of linear model, its limitations, and that in certain parts of the world, certain communities, certain people, certain organizations and cities are developing new ways of doing things, this thing called a circular economy. And that's starting to emerge as something that will hopefully in the future replace this industrial linear model that we know today. And many of us will be familiar with kind of the narrative around this, right? Why do we need to change? Well, it's this kind of equation that really doesn't add up anymore between increasing consumption. There's more people on the planet, but really it's a lot more about the kind of global middle class expanding and their massive kind of consumption demands in emerging economies, particularly China and Asia and so forth. On the one hand, on the other, we're hitting this finite resources on this planet, and a growing kind of recognition that those things really don't add up. It creates a kind of core contradiction, and we need to really do something about that, right? And the response, the idea is this of kind of decoupling, that we might be able to kind of separate those things in some way, so that actually increased demand doesn't mean more demand, more input of natural resources on the planet, or more input of natural resources from the planet. And that's called decoupling. And hopefully that's what we can do. But to get there, the idea is that we would need to develop a circular economy, right? Shift from a linear model, constantly pulling in more resources and putting out more waste, to a circular one that's kind of self-sustaining in a sense, right? It's not requiring all those resources. And as it says here, right, that's the pathway to kind of sustainability. And we know the linear economy we have at the moment is really a pathway to crisis and unsustainability, should we say. So that kind of coming down a level, circular economy, it's grounded in the study of feedback loops with nonlinear systems as exemplified by ecosystems. So this is kind of how we make a circular economy happen. It's through nonlinear processes, reuse, recycle, refurbish. Increased material consumption can be decoupled from resource extraction. And that's the general framing here, but it's really going to take a whole new kind of paradigm, a whole new approach to actually realize a circular economy. Fundamental transformation of major economic sectors across a number of dimensions. And increasingly people are kind of talking about the need for systems change in this context, that actually it won't be kind of incremental no kind of incremental set of steps is actually going to get us to where we need to be in terms of that decoupling at the speed that needs to happen, without actual some kind of transformational process taking place or systems change. And a key outcome of this shift to a circular economy is the notion of optimizing systems rather than parts. So this is really the big connection with systems thinking. Many people make that connection these days. So it's trying to move from things. We know the industrial model is about more products, sale, and ownership of things, incentivized towards competition, overproduction, overconsumption, and trying to move to a world of systems and service systems as how we get the things that we need. And that's a very different paradigm. It's actually a very different way of thinking, shifting from the linear one to this nonlinear one, which is actually about organization, right? It's actually about not how you get more things or how you produce more things, but how you organize systems to enable their most effective use. Value is generated by helping people use and exchange their resources more effectively, and thus optimize the system as a whole rather than any of the individual parts. So I like this quote. I think it really captures the Ellen McCarthy Foundation, kind of captures the need for systems change. The circular economy isn't about one manufacturer changing one product. It is about all the interconnected companies that form our infrastructure and economy coming together. It's about rethinking the operating system itself. Kind of captures the need for systems change, but of course, the challenge, I would say, in a lot of this is complexity, really. If we're shifting up from individual products and producing those and pushing more of those out to actual systems and how we connect across systems, then really you're in a world of kind of complexity, because it's not just connecting across one system, it's actually connecting across many different complex systems. It's a very different kind of challenge to the one we had before. So how do we connect and coordinate, not just within one system, but across many different systems? And that requires kind of thinking in new ways to kind of understand complexity and understand systems, and emergence too. Because in that world of that kind of level of complexity across all those systems, no one entity can manage this complexity, right? It kind of goes beyond any kind of capacities we have as centralized organizations to really enable that kind of decentralized coordination and collaboration, and the emergence of kind of that new kind of system that's really needed. How do we incentivize in a decentralized fashion for these connections and collaborations to grow and emerge? And this is the kind of key question for me, like, how do we grow a new system? Because that's really what's needed. It's not like a planned set of steps that's needed. It's actually the emergence or growth of a whole new network or a whole new set of networks across our entire kind of economies of coordination and collaboration and kind of resource and energy use that's really needed. And that's kind of an emergent thing that can't be planned or managed in a centralized way. And that we struggle a lot with, right? Because a lot of our approaches, they're very kind of linear. We know this, right? How governments and cities and so forth go about the circular economy, where it's using traditional reductionist kind of management approaches, assuming that we can kind of predict and control and move forwards in kind of a predictable, planned fashion through a set of stages. And the idea here is that that's not really what we're looking for. But it's actually what really kind of dominates a lot of kind of how we do things. It's really, if you look at a lot of kind of in practice, what happens in terms of circular economy, it's about changes in parts, really. We're trying to optimize parts, trying to change those, new bioplastics for water bottles, new electric car, shifting kind of materials in fashion and clothing, or changing to energy efficient light bulbs. These are changes in parts. And this is a lot of the narrative of kind of the changes in coming about in the circular economy and how we think about it. When of course, what's really needed is the coordination across them and kind of introduction and emergence of the whole system. So it's learning to kind of understand and think about and work with, and as I say, actually grow systems that make that possible. And the key, I think, is really shifting from a kind of a world of silos that we developed in the industrial age. That's what makes this so difficult, right? It makes it easy for us to go on optimizing those silos, those individual parts, and to try and change those individual parts. But actually very difficult to actually develop a whole system, whole networks that span across those silos that is really needed to get that entire circular system in a city, in a region, across a nation, wherever it may be. And I think more broadly, that's really that's really what systems innovation is about, right? Trying to shift from those industrial kind of siloed mode to this networked system mode. And its approach, systems innovation is a new systems-based approach to enabling change within complex organizations. Rather than reducing complex systems down to their individual parts and doing innovation in those parts, it looks more broadly at how the whole system is organized and aims to change the way the parts are interrelated and organized. So this graphic kind of illustrates it. It's innovation, which is the application of new ideas. But it's not the innovation in parts, right, that we know quite well. It's actually this system stuff where we're learning to think and see in systems, and from that have new perspectives and see new possibilities and see ways to actually change the system in terms of how it's organized and so forth, instead of kind of doing the innovation as usual. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about systems innovation. And it's particularly, as you can see, I kind of tried to make that connection why it's so relevant here. It's about new ways of thinking, and of course, new ways of kind of networked organization. And that thinking is obviously about systems thinking, as you probably know. So that's that, just the kind of high level stuff. I wanted to touch on a little bit toolkit and some of the guides and canvases, as mentioned. That's what it's made up of. You'll find them in the link I shared with you in the chat. You'll also find the guide on the website, the toolkit on the website. So there's four kind of main sections here. First, thinking in systems, learning how to do that, and then mapping the system out, and then thinking about the transition process that needs to take place, and then building new kind of platforms for coordination and collaboration, and guides and canvases in each of those. So the first section, well, these are the modules. There's about 16 or 20, yeah, there's about 20 of them actually, or 21. So yeah, thinking in systems, right? First, innovation on that level of whole systems is going to require us kind of thinking like that. It's the opposite from the kind of analytical approach. Instead of drilling down, we're kind of looking more broadly at the whole system. And this idea of emergence is really kind of key, as I mentioned. How do we get new kind of patterns to emerge across the system? Yeah. So these are some of the modules there. There's stuff around the iceberg model, bit of kind of U theory to get us to think about the old system on its different levels, the mental models, the structure, and so forth. And then what we'd like to see is the new system. There's other ones there around systems awareness and emergence. And those are great for running workshops or labs or whatever it is, to get a group of people together and get them kind of thinking about the existing system and how to shift their thinking to more kind of systems level. Of course, systems mapping, we need to understand the system. There's canvases around, I think Ruben will be showing us some maps today around systems maps, a little bit similar like this, to actually get us thinking about the whole thing as a system, the city or region or whatever it is. And of course, systems maps, think about the stakeholders, systems dynamics, so on and so forth. A bit of network analysis. The third bit section is around systems change. Now that we understand it, how do we actually change that system? How do we actually guide some kind of broader transition process? And there's some useful ones here. The two loops model, you may have heard the multi-level perspective, really useful for thinking about these really large kind of scale socio-technical or socio-environmental changes. This is the two loops one, thinking about the kind of incumbent system, what are the new innovations, what the new system might look like, and how do we kind of navigate that transition process. And the systems change canvas, the multi-level perspective I just mentioned. Final section, kind of hitting up against my 15 minutes here, but I just touched on this. It's for thinking about how to build new platforms, new kind of innovation ecosystems. This is bringing the actors from across the system together and enabling them, providing a context that's enabling them to collaborate and work together and create that new kind of infrastructure of coordination that's required, and kind of what are the different elements needed to bring those people together, what are the activities they're going to do, what's the identity of this new platform, what's the value model, how is value going to be distributed, the business model, and so forth. How do we assess for impact, who are the actors in the system, so on and so forth. And that's ecosystem building or systems building. And that's the final section. There's a couple of canvases there for you to look at, and I will wrap up. You can take a look at this as mentioned. I'll share the link again in the chat, and you'll be able to find it there.
Thanks, Josh. As Josh says, we'll be sharing links and everything on the chat right now, but also a folder at the end, so everything's in one place for you. Thank you, Josh. So you'd have heard why the circular economy is kind of perfect in many ways for systems innovation, lots of material and natural flows to map. And that brings me to our next speaker for today's webinar. We've got Ruben Boschart, who's a sustainability consultant at Accept Integrated Sustainability. Accept is a pioneering sustainability and design agency using systems thinking to innovate new ways to live, produce, and prosper in a circular, sustainable economy. And his background is in innovation, science, and physics, and he also really loves dancing, which I'm so pleased to hear about. We'll be hearing from him about Accept's model called Symbiosis in development, and really hearing about how he uses that to kind of take this circular economy approach to enterprises, to cities, to regions. And as Josh said, we'll get to see firsthand some of the maps, the systems maps that they use in their work. So without further ado, Ruben, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Jacqueline. Well, welcome here today. Thank you all for joining this Systems Innovation event. Very nice to see all of you here. I'm going to talk a little bit about systems thinking for circularity. I hope the stuff in my presentation will not be redundant, since Josh already explained some, but I think it will fit nicely together, so we'll see. I'm started sharing my screen. Are you seeing the right screen? I think so. Now give me the full screen. That's not what I wanted. This one. Can I get a thumbs up if you're seeing? Okay, yeah. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about systems thinking for systems analysis for circularity. We'll start with a little bit of theory today, and then I'll walk you through some examples. I don't have a lot of time, so it might feel like I'm rushing through it a little bit, but maybe there is time for some questions after the presentation. In our current world, we are facing huge challenges. There are pollution problems. There's waste piling up in resource sinks. There is a possible climate problem. How do we go about to fix these problems as a society? That's what we try to do at Accept. At Accept, we try to create the foundations of a sustainable society, and we also develop great places to live, work, play, and prosper. What you see here is a concept that has been developed in the San Francisco Transbay. And we also really like to take inspiration from nature. A lot of our projects are bio-based, and this is one of our polydome concepts, in which we combine different types of plants to create a indoor ecosystem, which is very productive, a lot more productive than a monoculture. We have knowledge in and offer different services to clients, but we also develop our own projects, and some of our areas of work are in the built to natural environment. We do consulting for organizations in industry, and we give trainings and knowledge based upon our experience. And this is our team, and you can see in the background it's situated in UCO, which is our workplace, which is a fully sustainable redevelopment of a heritage building built on circularity principles. So it's kind of a nice place as well. But I will start diving into the theory after having introduced ourselves as Accept, which will be about SID, Symbiosis in Development. It's a integrated sustainability development framework, which offers one scope for a lot of theories to be embedded in and to be applied to any project. So this tool allows for example, improvements of resilience within a project, systems thinking, stakeholder involvement, co-creation. But today we'll be talking about circularity, so that will be the focus of this talk. But I also will have to introduce you to some concepts to familiarize you with what I'm talking about. A system is comprised of a network, and that network is comprised of elements that make up the network. And we in the theory of symbiosis in development define this as the system level, the network level, and the object level. Where in the object level you have your elements of analysis, your objects, your things, which you then can categorize in our LC tool, in which I will show you a little bit later again. There is a network level connecting the objects or the elements of interest, and then you have the system level. And in the system level, if you reach resilience, harmony, and autonomy, you have managed to become sustainable. Well, that's not an easy feat, I'll tell you. But we can do it. We can do it as society. I believe that. And I hope that we together can work on that. This object level tool, this LC stack, is a way of categorizing, but also helping in the ideation process of your elements and your objects that you need to include in your analysis of your system. And if you manage to get all your objects mapped, then you can go into the systems analysis, which then contains your system contains properties, which is, it can be resilient, it can be harmonious, it can be autonomous. So very quickly, resilience, it's a way to withstand unexpected external disturbances. And if you are resilient, you have ability to return to a healthy state after suffering a blow. Harmony, it's all about fairness to each other, to all human beings, to all living things. And it's a measure of tension inside of a system. So when it's very low, there is chance for strife or internal collapse or conflict. And then the most important one for today, autonomy. It's a level of independence of the systems from the systems of any other level. Autonomous systems are less influenced by what happens around the world because they don't rely on other systems. And circularity is a property of an autonomous system. So how should we go about doing systems analysis for circularity? Well, I think all of us are known with these more simple diagrams of just looping your resources around. And for communications, these type of diagrams are very useful. But if you actually want to reduce your waste in material and energy flows, you will need to make very detailed maps in which you show all the individual elements, their relations, and hopefully can find some interventions that will increase the circularity of the entire system, minimizing waste. Here on the right, you see how you can, for example, use LC, the tool I just showed you, to analyze the circularity supply chain in a different categories. So not just on the energy scale, but also on the material scale, labor scale, time scale, and then you can analyze the outputs on a waste environmental damage, land use categories, and other ones. So going on a little bit further, we want to, of course, move on to from a linear economy to a circular economy. And
apologies, Ruben, I've muted you by accident. Would you just unmute yourself again?
Oh,
sorry,
yeah.
We missed the last sentence. Apologies for that.
I think it was, so I would like to go on with some circularity design considerations before I move on to examples in the next slides. I have 6 prepared. So some important considerations when trying to create circularity maps and design those is create short cycles. Shorter cycles are often more easy to manage in real life and on your maps. At the end of the cycle, bring your elements back into your value chain as soon as possible. So this is actually based upon this first rule, but it is a little bit more practical because super use over reuse kind of is a more practical indication of shorter cycles, longer cycles. What does it mean? And in your cycles, you want to prevent mixing or degrading elements within your cycle. Furthermore, you want to involve the entire life cycle of your object or your system of analysis into your circularity design. And when you have to reuse resources, try to do that for various purposes at the same time, while you include all waste streams to come up with a more holistic design instead of a reductionist design. And one practical tip when you start mapping in the beginning of your worksheet, because this allows for your circular design to evolve around your system or object of interest. And again, we normally use this LC tool to help us to categorize and work in the ideation steps of finding what do we need to map in our circularity diagram. So going on to some examples. Here you can see a very stylized circularity diagram of the Schiphol Catalyst project. This diagram is very useful for communication. And as you can see, the waste streams, or let's say material and energy streams, are very clearly indicated, and it allows for easy communication. But sadly, this is not how the actual analysis is performed. And I would really like to show you a technical diagram of this project, but I can't. But I can show you a technical diagram of another project, which is the Schiphol Zuid project, of which the initial question was to develop some sustainable housing, which are located here in this diagram. And based on that, we start looking at, okay, what systems does a sustainable housing or housing need? So then you have to look at stuff like energy and water production, which we kind of situated over here. Food production, which we kind of situated over here. And waste streams, which we kind of situated over here in this diagram. And ideally, you end up with this diagram with no arrows going in or out from outside of your diagram, because then you would have a fully circular diagram. In reality, this is never possible. You will always use something from outside. Ideally, you minimize it as far as possible, of course. And well, just showing you the whole thing. And this is something we do for several projects, not just for the Schiphol Zuid project. So for example, I showed you the Polydome project image in the beginning. For that one, we also did this resource, material and energy flow diagram. And actually for all physical projects, we do this kind of mapping to make sure that we make the system more circular and autonomous and find the weak spots for resilience as well. I'm just going to go a little scale higher. I'm not sure if some of you are known with the industrial symbiosis concept. It's also a concept which fits into circularity, but within it, it's more focused on industry-based circularity concepts. In Kalundborg, this was, well, it kind of emerged through self-organization, and this intricate resource exchange network kind of spontaneously emerged because of the profit for all the parties involved. All the parties involved had waste, which they needed to treat or well, dispose of, but now they could find other parties that were interested in this waste, quote unquote. And this industrial symbiosis concept is gaining some traction. And we as well are working on our own secret industrial symbiosis project, which is undisclosed at the moment. So I cannot tell you about where it is or what it is. But here I can show you another small, a little bit in between a communications diagram and a technical diagram. It has, I think, all the relevant flows, but we don't show any amounts here. And of course, as you can see, it's a lot less than the industrial symbiosis concept, but with these kind of bigger material and energy flows between different parties, other problems arise, such as that you're not just working for, you're not just optimizing the system for one party, which has power probably in the choices they make. You're optimizing the system for all parties in the system. And then you also need to have a consensus of what that system then needs to become, which is an interesting exercise as well. And then I will like to show you a little bit about Orchid City, which is also one of our new projects. Here we have a circularity diagram for Orchid City. As you can see, it has quite a lot of elements, but it's because we want to create a city that is self-sustainable for 75% at least of its resources. And of course, that is a huge task, and that's why we would need to create a more complicated diagram like this to be able to achieve something like that. As you can see in this diagram, again, we have kind of split it off the different categories in which you can put the material or energy flows, where over here we have the water, over here we have the energy related things, over here we have the bio-based agriculture related things, and over here we have processing for food and retail, and over here we have processing for industry. And together with that and this waste collection stream that puts materials back into these processing steps, we hope to kind of make sure that in the system design in the end of such a city, which we will be involved in, the parties among themselves will already know that, okay, we are part of this larger network of a circularity design, and we will do our best to make sure that within this design, the goals are actually achieved in the end, which is, I think, something we hope to aspire to be able to achieve. So concluding, if you want to start with circularity, define your object in your system, start with your main object or system of interest in the middle of your map. Start mapping the material and energy flows between the objects and processing steps, making your network, and then start making things circular. Make sure that no resource, energy, or material flows exit the system, but try to re-enter them into the system. And for that, sometimes you need to enter other elements into the system. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. If you want to know a little bit more about us, please check out our website. And we also offer a free course about the symbiosis in development, and it's also freely available, the book. It's you can download it for free online. And well, thank you for this opportunity to talk, Jacqueline and Charles.
Thank you so much, Ruben. I've got a couple of questions already written down, but before we come back to questions, and we'll be taking questions from the floor as well, I wanted to first bring in Dina to make sure we get to listen to her story and some of her work as well. So Dina, if you can be prepared to start sharing your screen, that would be amazing. I'll just introduce you very quickly. So Dina, our second speaker, Dina El Filali, is a consultant, facilitator, and trainer working in urban resilience and sustainability. She's the founder of METRAC, Metropolitan Training Research Engineering and Consultancy, and she's hugely passionate about complexity and systems thinking. I'm not quite sure whether she loves dancing too. She'll be able to tell us, but I've kind of done a bit of sleuthing, and I think Dina is a spoken word artist. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to hear any of the spoken word. But we'll definitely be hearing about her work around facilitating the urban energy transition in the Netherlands, in particular the role of hydrogen. So without further ado, over to you, Dina.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. Maybe next time I will perform a small spoken word session. Let me see if I can share my screen correctly. Can you all see it? It's like a thumbs up. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having me again. I have a presentation about towards the circular energy mobility system. I brought them together, and mostly actually about how to facilitate this energy transition and the role of hydrogen within it. So I really like that Jos and Ruben drove a bit more about the how. Short introduction I will give. The city as an ecosystem with a metabolism. The energy system itself, the role of hydrogen, and how we could facilitate such a transition, and how we're basically doing that within a living lab environment. A bit of my background. I have an urban environmental systems engineering background. I soon became to realize that I was mostly interested about how to make those urban systems sustainable and resilient. And I also realized that empowerment of actors plays a crucial role within them, within the whole process. And I have a background in creativity, and I really wanted to use that in the way of how I facilitate these systems into becoming resilient and sustainable. And so I have different kind of roles as a young author and spoken word artist, a New Amsterdam Council member, a facilitator, and the founder of Metric. And today, mostly talking from Metric. Metric actually stands for the 4 services: training, research, engineering, consultancy, 4 different teams: energy, water, food and nutrients, and materials. And today we'll be talking about the energy and the materials, and 3 approaches. So use system thinking, participatory and multidisciplinary way of working, with the aim to facilitate cities and our metropolitan areas, so the hinterlands included, towards becoming sustainable, circular, resilient, and just. We really want them to become equal as well. And it actually all started with, within my studies, like viewing the city as an ecosystem with a metabolism, that our current cities cannot be regarded as sustainable. There's like a lot of resources that flow into the city, and there's actually a lot of negative externalities in terms of waste and emissions and heat losses. And we want these to become a bit more circular, and it's like 4 steps that you could use very promptly. You want to do a baseline from, okay, what goes in, what goes out. Then you can use Ruben's maps to actually have a bit of also, okay, what kind of ways are there to reduce the demand? So for example, on a more component level, you would say that, okay, I will isolate the house. I will build houses that are with passive solar design. But then you also want to reduce the output. You can reuse your heat, for example, with heat exchanger, etc. And at the end, when it comes to the energy system, you want to use a bit of multi-sourcing to cover the remaining demand. But this you could use for the different kind of resources, of course. And then there's this whole complexity that unravels. And if I would like break it down, or at least for myself, the way I see it is that I see a city as an ecosystem that provides different kind of services like living, like working, leisure, being connected, education, mobility, and tons of other resources actually in ecosystem services like infiltration, cooling, etc. And the idea is actually how can we have those or attain those services and use the resources like energy to do what we do in a sustainable kind of way, and how can we coordinate that? Well, today, again, the energy system. And actually, yeah, Ruben and Joss in the beginning also stated it, but there's like a bunch of stuff going on in the world at the moment. And with regard to the energy system, well, one could say that, okay, we suffer actually from climate change, there's air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, there's this uncertainty with regard to the long short-term supply of energy, and there's also the depletion of our energy resources on one hand. On the other hand, we have the mismatch between, for example, energy supply from wind and solar, aging infrastructure and demand, aging infrastructure, and an increasing energy demand due to rising economies. It's a complex story, of course, but complex doesn't necessarily mean that it's complicated, I would say. Like if you zoom out, then it's a beautiful maze, but once we're in it, it looks all way too chaotic. And what complex systems actually mean, and luckily systems innovation has amazing courses about it, but promptly it would say like, okay, many subsystems and elements that are related to one another in a nonlinear way and are characterized with path dependency. They have the ability to self-organize themselves and emerge. They are multi-dimensions, and they have the ability to learn, adapt, and co-evolve. And with regard to the multidimensionality, which is important to take into account when you want to make a system sustainable and resilient, is that even if we're talking about the energy system, there's always like local, regional, and global physical conditions that influence the extent to which you can change it. There's soft and hard infrastructure. There's formal and informal structures between people, but also organization institutions. And there's like people themselves with their consciousness and behaviors and routines that influence all these different dimensions themselves. And then on the other side, you also have like the horizontal level with the chain itself, from resource gathering, processing, generation, distribution, consumption, collection, treatment, reuse, and also throughout this whole chain, there are different actors that you want to take with you in the moment that you actually facilitate a transition. And when it comes to the role of hydrogen within the energy transition, I'm working on this project, Dutch Boosting Group, and it's a really cool project. It has actually, it's looking at, okay, hydrogen has, like, with regard to the mobility system and the circularity of it, two big roles. On one hand, it can help as an energy carrier to close the gap between the supply and the demand. On the other hand, you can also look at the fact that a lot of trucks and mobility can be refurbished, reused, and converted into hydrogen ones. So there's two aspects. And this is just a nice scheme that shows from the wind and the solar to the equalizers to the filling station, and then ultimately the truck, how it's connected to one another. And then actually, all nice theory, I would like to jump to a case in the region of the Netherlands, more particularly the Regio Food Valley region. They are currently working on a program, Living Lab Regio Food Valley Circular. It's a program within the Food Valley region to work together towards a circular economy. It's a collaboration program of 3 years. And within this collaboration platform, there's like 8 municipalities or cities that have actually taken this quest. And there's like institutions and universities, but also different kind of businesses that are also collaborating on this program. It consists, and I won't, it's a bit of an overwhelming picture I always find, but it has like different kind of activities and workplaces. And well, mine is the workplace of hydrogen that actually got established last year. And what I wanted to talk actually most about is, okay, we have like this whole energy transition. There's a role of hydrogen, but how do you facilitate such a process or such a systems innovation process itself? Just how, a bit of a background. The motivation behind the workplace was, well, there was like a need to make the energy system more sustainable. Hydrogen plays a huge role, or can play a potential role. There were already different kind of steps that have been taken, and there was like an increasing amount of initiatives that were identified within the region. And then the aim of this workplace is to boost this development of initiatives and innovation through actually facilitating knowledge exchange, the development of initiatives, making connection possible, and collaboration. I do that together with Erik van der Veer, my colleague over there. You can contact them and find them through LinkedIn. But what we've done so far, and I will dive into how this platform and living lab environment looks like in a bit. We outlined actually the systems chain and the multiple dimensions that influence the energy mobility system within the region, the different actually actors and initiatives, the needs of those actors, and what kind of systems lock-ins are preventing these initiatives from being able to scale up. We designed, or actually co-designed, based upon these identified needs and lock-ins, a facilitation process. We've been empowering the participants so that they actually can collaborate successfully in this process, that they have the right know-how, and that also that they are empowered enough with the connections. And we are now just co-create actually a common vision for the next 2 years. And the next steps now are that students from Wageningen University are conducting a regional research on the demand and supply, and we want to work towards a regional initiative. How does this living lab environment look like? So it will bring together the users, which are the residents, for example, around the gas tank stations, the end users, the transporters, the taxi companies, the private actors, the exhibitors, the suppliers, the public actors, the municipalities and the provinces, but also the regional networks. And at the same time, also the knowledge institutions, in this case, Wageningen University, but also University of Applied Sciences is part of this collaboration. And what we realized, we're like, okay, so far there are like a couple of lock-ins that emerged through the time, that throughout actually the whole process emerged. It's like the social, the awareness and the competences, but also governmental, organizational, like certain regulations with regard to hydrogen are not fully developed yet, and you need to look at it from a network level. On finance level, hydrogen is not always viewed as a really new innovation, but the innovation lies in the way you coordinate it itself. And there's a need to take both the supply and demand into account, because you have a tank station that only wants to supply hydrogen once they know how much the demand is. And at the same time, for example, a taxi company won't invest in hydrogen cars if they don't know for sure that they can tank hydrogen within the region. And then the technology part as well, like currently it's mostly visible for heavy vehicles and the efficiency is still low. So how do we coordinate this? We, based on the lock-ins and the identified actors, made a process design for 2021, and it consists out of, we did a kickoff last year, 4 workplaces through which you want to go from awareness to creating support, from awareness to connection actually, and go from finding initiative to shaping them. We started with having a bit of interested participants, and now we really have like invested ones. We're now working towards workplace 3, and next one we really realized we want to go to realizing participants with a usable product at the end. And actually every workplace we highlight we tackle actually one of the lock-ins that we found and try to kind of see, okay, how can we solve it within that, and to actually find leverage point for the next session itself, so that we can facilitate this process and go from initiation to really co-creating a design for the region. Okay, let me see. So very shortly, within every workplace, we diverge and converge. We try to inspire and interact. We try to tackle a lock-in, and we try to facilitate the collaboration itself. this is a bit about the result from the first, like we saw it, okay, there's like 50% really wants to work on a tank station or has interest in tank station. 1/3 wants to drive on hydrogen. 17% is interested in the distribution, and 10% is like interested in different kind of hydrogen facilities, or for example, for agriculture industry. And we also identified with like different kind of needs. In blue, needs for really collaboration. In red, it needed to be really concrete. Green, they needed to be inspired and have like case stories. And in blue, they really wanted to look at, for example, the legislations, the technology, the practical side as well. We used the platform to set the conditions actually from which collaboration initiatives can emerge. And the main aim of this platform, on which, well, within the era of Corona, we needed to go digital, but all the workplaces actually were organized, and there is what we actually shared our knowledge, the development, the connections, and the collaboration. And the vision that we're currently actually working towards, and that we stated, is that by 2022, the application of hydrogen within the region will be made possible for at least one category of users. In this case, actually, it's going quite well. We have like one category distributions that are next year starting actually distributing hydrogen within the region with the milk run project. Then, oh, something happened. Shoot. And well, let's try to do it again. In 2025, this actually application will meet the initial needs in the region and can be scaled up further. And ultimately, in the long term, we want the deployability of hydrogen for mobility within the region food valley to be realized. So this is a bit what we're working with through this actually process. I'll try it one more time, and then I go to the last slide. To a couple of lessons learned. Facilitating this change, and there's a lot more lessons learned, is a very chaotic and insecure process very often. But you should actually also be open for insights and allow them to emerge over time. And I think empowering participants is crucial if you want them to participate successfully on every step along the way, so that you can really tackle all these different kind of dimensions and influence the extent to which actually a system can change. That's it. And yeah, if you want to connect afterwards, feel free to contact me. That's it for now. Thank you for your time.
What such amazing presentations, both of you, Ruben, Dina, and thanks also, Joss, for setting the context and sharing about some of the tools in our toolkit that can really complement this work. And I think there is a lot of kind of connections and, you know, cross-pollination, I beg your pardon, across the different presentations we had. So my head's buzzing. So those of you who haven't had a chance to put your questions into the chat, please do so. We have another 10 minutes or so just to do a quick tour of any comments and questions. But I might just kick off, and I think, Joss, you've got a few to chip in as well. I'm kind of bouncing in my seat, just, you know, hearing how the circular economy space has really evolved, you know, just looking at more technical material flows to really also incorporating the kind of human aspects of it. Ruben, you touched on your object stack, and I see things like health and happiness. I kind of wonder from you, kind of what's your experience been like incorporating those types of more kind of less tangible objects, if you like, into your mapping. And then Dina, of course, I've kind of heard you mention the human aspect to all of this, which makes it really chaotic and insecure, as you were saying. Any reflections again on this social piece, the social aspect to enabling circularity? But maybe Ruben, should we start with you and then come to Dina?
Yeah. So in the end, I think we as a society tends to reduce sustainability, at least to the physical aspects of it, which are materials, energy, and sometimes biodiversity. In our Symbiosis in Development framework, we try to look at it from a broader perspective, where also social relations, for example, are of importance to maintain sustainability within the system. And that's why in that diagram, I showed you the LC tool. For example, happiness and health are also part of that, because that's what makes us humans, right? We live on our health and our happiness, and that's what drives us to a certain degree as well. So not incorporating that in a framework which should kind of incorporate everything that incorporates sustainability would, I think it's necessary. Yeah.
I think I'll just jump in and say a couple of words. It might sound a little bit abstract, but actually in practice, it's quite concrete. You think about like consumer culture. And we've kind of taken a problem in one space, the social space, and we've shifted it into another space, you know, because we don't feel fulfilled kind of as human beings and culturally and so forth. We project those problems onto consuming more and using more resources and so forth. So if you don't take that holistic view and you don't account for those social and cultural factors, well, you're not playing with all the ingredients that you can be playing with, and you can shift the problem from one place to another, right? That's what systems thinkers always talk about. You need to take a holistic perspective, otherwise you're going to move the problem from one place to another, and that's kind of often what we do if we when we have kind of cultural problems or you know, not happy and so forth, we shift that problem somewhere else and create a lot of issues on a material level. So I think it's totally necessary to really deal with all the different factors. But yeah, Dina, what do you have to say?
No, I just, by the way, if I'm laughing out of recognition and and how beautiful everything is. No, for me, like, I have an engineering background, and what engineers usually do is like, we just rearrange element to attain a certain function. And the function that we're now actually shifting towards is going from that we want something to be able to perform a certain thing towards more a function of a service. So we want to go from A to B, we want to be happy, we want to live in an inclusive city, for example. And that's what I'm always having in my mind, like, okay, we're talking about the energy system, we want to make them sustainable. How can I rearrange elements in such a way that the mobility as a service can become sustainable? And how can, for example, in this case, hydrogen play a role? And in what way can I rearrange so the people and their empowerment level, that they can contribute successfully in this whole transition? So that's, for me, the social aspects that I'm always considering, like when I'm rearranging elements to, in the case, trying to attain this sustainable function that I'm working towards.
Mm-hmm. Thanks to all of you. There are kind of quite a few questions coming through in the chat, so I'm going to just move us to some of those. Someone's posted, how to decide what to leave in and out? What do you investigate? I've got a guest behind me. Apologies. How to... She's so naughty. Josh, do you want to take over the question?
Sure. So let's see, is it really possible to define and maintain a circular economy without circular money that can't flow out of defined closures? Okay, that's one question. Is it possible to match resources to needs in a benign way without high variety, full spectrum accounting tools, extended REA, etc. Anybody want to pick up on those? Oh, I have other ones actually.
With full spectrum accounting tools, it seems, I don't know if this is the case, but hearing the comment, it seems like someone doesn't want to use full spectrum finance analysis tools. I'm not that, or accounting tools, I'm not that familiar with them, but I do recognize a being afraid of the complexity thing in there, which I think for the systems thinking, if you want it to be successful, you need not to be afraid of it. You need to embrace it and use it. Use it to your advantage.
Cool. Jacqueline, do you want to try again? Or Dina, did you have to say something?
No, I just read the follow-up question actually that Jacqueline already started asking about how do you decide what to leave in and out, what to investigate. Seems like some aspects of systems are not considered to get the work done. I think that's difficult. In my case, like I said, I started with looking at the multidimensionality, like, okay, what kind of social, economic, governmental, technological dimensions influence the chain that I'm looking at. Then I look at the chain itself, like, okay, from the moment it's produced to the moment that it's consumed, what different kind of actors are involved within that. And that's how I sort of for myself try to identify, or at least where I start with identifying the important actors, and then I continue with breaking down, etc. So that's a bit for me, and that's also the boundaries, because otherwise, yeah, you can go, you can make it as complex as possible, and then you also find different kind of emerging solutions maybe, but you also have to break it down for yourself within the scope that you have in order to be able to facilitate it as well. In my case, the boundaries were the region that I was working in. And of course, I'm always also looking at other regions that we can collaborate with as well. So they also exist, different networks of hydrogens, but they have different disciplines. So of course, you can also use those as well. But yeah, it helps to have your identified boundaries, if that answers the question.
Excellent. Great teamwork, by the way. Thanks, team, for having my back. Perhaps we can squeeze in time for maybe one more question from earlier on, although I know there are more coming in. Something from John, I think, about, is it really possible to define and maintain a circular economy without circular money? So I'm kind of thinking something about, like, how do we account for the value in our systems? Any experiences from either of you? Joss, if you want to chip in as well.
I'll let the others. I mean, I had another question that was more interesting to me. Actually, I wanted to follow up on what Dina was saying about stakeholders, and you introduced one of your slides about lock-in. So I'm wondering, like, are you able to get all the people you need in the room in your workshops? And are you able to get the people who are kind of locking the system in? And what do you do about, do those people want to join? Does Shell want to join? So on and so forth.
Shell wants to buy all the tank stations. It's not a problem. But what I do think, and this is actually slowly dawning on to me, is that in this whole facilitating process, you also need to be a bit unbiased. I've been like a huge Marvel DC Comics fan with heroes and villains, and viewing, like, for example, of course, there's like different kind of accountabilities, but you want to collaborate also with villains because you need to make the system sustainable. And in this case, we don't have Shell in the workplace. We have only really interesting people because it's really the niche part of the innovation itself. So unless now we're slowly going to the regional landscape, but only when you really break it open, then you will find how hard the regime or landscape level really is. And then probably, of course, in that sense, you need to sit also with those people on the table. But for example, I cannot name names, but there are a couple of names that I didn't expect, but they do. I mean, ultimately, everyone wants to remain at this planet as well. And everyone has, of course, fear, and money plays a crucial role in maintaining the system and surviving as a company. But also they have to, like, if they want to survive, they have to alter their ways and change and adapt.
They're part of the system.
Yeah.
They're part of the system. Yeah. And I guess you had like needs analysis, right? Didn't you? And obviously stakeholder analysis and just seeing what the needs of these people are and then speaking to it, I guess is a big part of it. One thing, Ruben, in your presentation I was really interested in was autonomy, the connection between autonomy and circularity, right? The way, I don't know if that's really accounted for normally. I was thinking about it the other day. I was at my parents' place in Ireland, and they're self-sufficient in food. And we go out into the garden or we pick some tomatoes and eat those. And like, that's the perfect supply chain, isn't it? It's very autonomous. And then you can throw the waste back in the garden, right? So it's the perfect one. But normally we're thinking about, we've got this vast supply chain, you know, spanning across continents. And how do we kind of optimize that a little bit, you know, instead of what you're talking about autonomy, and like, how can we really shrink that down to a much more manageable scale? Do you really account for that, like in the work that you do, the autonomy factor?
We do see a large, very kind of unconnected supply chains in that sense as unresilient, yes, and not very autonomous in the sense that it is dependent on other systems. So and this is actually quite funny, because in the EU there is some kind of commotion about critical resources not being the availability might being at risk, but nobody is actually talking about using circularity to solve that kind of problem, although it's an obvious solution. Just use less, import less resource.
And we aren't really talking about those 500,000 landfills in Europe either, are we? Like, circularity is normally about how do you make the things that are coming out of the factory now circular, when we've got literally 500,000 piles of rubbish under the ground that's probably going to float up with climate change and all the floods and so forth. So there's a whole dimension to it that's actually not really looked at fully. But the Orchid City is really interesting, that I know Tom has launched. That's a good example of autonomy, isn't it? These are quite small, I think the ones he's proposing in Brazil, isn't it? They're quite small kind of communities at this stage, aren't they? Autonomous ones.
Yeah, and actually the idea is that it should be able to function autonomously. And of course, we don't want to start making computer chips in our Orchid City or whatever. So in the end, if you want to, we are still always embedded in the system, and we are part of the global world economy and society. But you can, within that, you can make autonomous clusters, pieces, which you then connect through the network, and then only some very specialty resources or materials would be exchanged. But all the basic needs could be produced by these autonomous clusters themselves.
I guess it's just prioritizing it, isn't it? It's like we don't really put it as a priority. Obviously, as you say, you're always going to be embedded in a global economy and dependent upon that. But how do you prioritize the things that are closer and easier, rather than, I guess, a lot of things we buy them from China because it's cheaper. So just switching that accounting, I guess, is a big part of it. Instead of trying to be, you know, fully self-sufficient, I'm going to do everything myself, which is kind of never going to work.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I guess, and this kind of ties into the question about the economy as well. I feel like within the whole concept of sustainability and circularity, a lot of the times within the accounting, the risk is not really accounted for, the true value of things. Hopefully that will get us a step closer, realizing the true value of things, the value or the cost of distance, for example, these type of things.
Excellent. So many excellent points. And I feel like we could continue the conversation. And on that final point, the Dasgupta review, for those of you who are interested in kind of what some ideas and recommendations for what a better accounting system could look like, you might want to check that out. can I also ask maybe Ruben and Dina to put in the chat any kind of your contact details if you're willing to share. Ruben, I think you posted a link about the book. Yeah, any other resources, please do share with us. And Joss, if you can put into the chat a couple of links. I think we've got the folder with all the presentations from today, as well as the Circular Economy Toolkit that you heard about, which contains many of the different frameworks that have been alluded to today, transition perspective, multi-level perspective, etc. Excellent, that's there. Joss, also the link to the SI London community platform as a way for us to continue the conversation and also link up through other events. All the information you need and ways of networking with others is on that link that Joss has just shared. So I think that's all the admin I needed to cover. I just want to again thank Ruben, thank Dina and Joss for making the time, but also sharing with us such kind of intriguing insights and really, really practical examples through all your presentations. I'm hoping that everyone's going to leave this call feeling really inspired and feel like they've got something from today's session. So that's all. If you want to unmute yourself and say goodbye and thank you or anything else, you're welcome to do so. But this is us checking out and we're going to end the recording now, I think. Thanks everyone again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.